This is an audiobook for Stephen King's The Dark Tower series, continuing with Book 2, The Drawing of the Three. Part 1, The Prisoner, Chapter 5, Showdown and Shootout. Just like the last few times, I'll be splitting this chapter into two sections. 1. In a blues tune from the 20s, Billie Holiday, who would one day discover the truth for herself, sang, "Doctor told me, daughter, you gotta quit it fast, because one more rocket gonna be your last." Henry Dean's last rocket went up just 5 minutes before the van pulled up in front of the Leaning Tower and his brother was herded inside. Because he was on Henry's right, George Biondi, known to his friends as Big George and to his enemies as Big Nose, asked Henry's question. Now, as Henry sat nodding and blinking owlishly over the board, Trix Pastino put the die in his hand, which had already gone the dusty color that results in the extremities after long-term heroin addiction. The dusty color, which is the precursor of gangrene. "Your turn, Henry," Trix said, and Henry let the die fall from his hand. When he went on staring into space and showed no intention of moving his game piece, Jimmy Haspio moved it for him. "Look at this, Henry," he said. "You got a chance to score a piece of the pie." "Reese's Pieces," Henry said dreamily, and then looked around as if awakening. "Where's Eddie?" "He'll be here pretty soon," Trix smoothed him. "Just play the game." "How about a fix?" "Play the game, Henry." Okay, stop leaning on me." "Don't lean on him," Kevin Blake said to Jimmy. "Okay, I won't," Jimmy said. "You ready?" George Biondi said, and gave the others an enormous wink as Henry's chin floated down to his breastbone and then slowly rose once more. It was like watching a soaked log not quite ready to give in and sink for good. "Yeah," Henry said, "bring it on." "Bring it on," Jimmy Haspio cried happily. "You bring that fucker," Trix agreed, and they all roared with laughter. In the other room, Balazar's edifice, now 3 levels high, trembled again, but did not fall. "Okay, listen close," George said, and winked again. Although Henry was on a sports category, George announced the category was arts and entertainment. "What popular country and western singer has hits with A Boy Named Sue, Folsom Prison Blues, and numerous other shit-kicking songs?" Kevin Blake, who actually could add 7 and 9 if you gave him poker chips to do it with, howled with laughter, clutching his knees and nearly upsetting the board. Still pretending to scan the card in his hand, George continued, "This popular singer is known as the Man in Black. His first name means the same as the place that you go to take a piss, and his last name means what you got in your wallet unless you're a fucking needle freak." There was a long, expectant silence. "Walter Brennan," Henry said at last. Bellows of laughter. Jimmy Haspio clutched Kevin Blake. Kevin punched Ginny in the shoulder repeatedly, and Balazar's office, the house of cards, which was now becoming a tower of cards, trembled again. "Quiet down," Simi yelled to Boss's building. They quieted at once. "Right," George said. "You got that one right, Henry. It was a toughie, but you came through." "Always do," Henry said. "Always come through in a fucking clutch. How about a fix?" "Good idea," George said, and took a Roy-Tan cigar box from behind him. From it he produced a hypo. He stuck it into his scarred vein above Henry's elbow, and Henry's last rocket took off. 2. The van's exterior was grungy, but underneath the road filth and spray paint was a high-tech marvel the DEA guys would have envied. As Balazar had said on more than one occasion, you couldn't beat the bastards unless you could compete with the bastards, unless you could match their equipment. It was expensive stuff, but Balazar's side had the advantage. They stole what the DEA guys had to buy at grossly inflated prices. There were electronics companies, employees all the way down to the eastern seaboard, willing to sell you top-secret stuff at bargain basement prices. These cazzaroni, Jack Andolini called them Silicon Valley cokeheads, practically threw the stuff at you. Under the dash was a fuzz buzzer, a UHF police radar jammer, a high-range, high-frequency radio transmissions detector, an HRHF jammer, a transponder amplifier that would make anybody trying to track the van by standard triangulation methods decide it was simultaneously in Connecticut, Harlem, and Montauk Sound, a radio telephone, and a small red button which Andolini pushed as soon as Eddie Dean got out of the van. In Balazar's office, the intercom uttered a single short buzz. "That's them," he said. "Claudio, let them in. Simi, you tell everyone to dummy up. So far as Eddie Dean knows, no one's with me but you and Claudio. Simi, Go in the storeroom with the other gentlemen. They went, Simi turning left, Claudio Andolini going right. Calmly, Balazar started on another level of his edifice. 3. Just let me handle it, Eddie said again as Claudio opened the door. Yes, the gunslinger said, but remained alert, ready to come forward the instant it seemed necessary. Keys rattled. The gunslinger was very aware of odors, old sweat from Cole Vincent on his right, and some sharp aftershave from Jack Andolini on his left, and, as they stepped into the dimness, the sour tang of beer. The smell of beer was all he recognized. This was no tumble-down saloon with sawdust on the floor and planks set across sawhorses for a bar. It was as far from a place like Sheb's in Toll as you could get, the gunslinger reckoned. Glass gleamed mellowly everywhere, more glass in this one room than he had seen in all his years since his childhood, when supply lines began to break down, partially because of interdicting raids carried out by the rebel forces of Farson, the good man, but mostly, he thought, simply because the world was moving on. Farson had been a symptom of that great movement, not the cause. He saw their reflections everywhere, on the walls, on the glass-faced bar, and the long mirror behind it. He could even see them reflected as curved miniatures in the graceful bell shapes of wine glasses hung upside down above the bar, glasses as gorgeous and fragile as festival ornaments. In one corner was a sculpted creation of lights that rose and changed, rose and changed, rose and changed. Gold to green, green to yellow, yellow to red, red to gold again. Written across it in great letters was a word he could read, which meant nothing to him. Rockola. Never mind. There was business to be done here. He was no tourist. He must not allow himself the luxury of behaving like one, no matter how wonderful or strange these things might be. The man who had let him in was clearly the brother of the man who drove what Eddie called the van, as in Vanguard, Roland supposed. Although he was much taller and perhaps 5 years younger, he wore a gun and a shoulder rig. Where's Henry? Eddie asked. I want to see Henry. He raised his voice. Henry! Hey, Henry! No reply, only silence in which the glasses hung over the bar seemed to shiver with a delicacy that was just beyond the range of a human ear. Mr. Balazar would like to speak to you first. You got him gagged and tied up somewhere, don't you? Eddie asked. And before Claudio could do more than open his mouth to reply, Eddie laughed. No, what am I thinking about? You got him stoned, that's all. Why would you bother with ropes and gags when all you have to do to keep Henry quiet is needle him? Okay, take me to Balazar. Let's get this over with. 4. The gunslinger looked at the tower of cards on Balazar's desk and thought, another sign. Balazar did not look up. The tower of cards had grown too tall for that to be necessary, but rather over the top. His expression was one of pleasure and warmth. Eddie, he said, I'm glad to see you, son. I heard you had some trouble at Kennedy. I ain't your son, Eddie said flatly. Balazar made a little gesture that was at the same time comic, sad, and untrustworthy. You hurt me, Eddie, it said. You hurt me when you say a thing like that. Let's cut through it, Eddie said. You know it comes down to one thing or the other. Either the feds are running me or they had to let me go. You know they didn't sweat it out of me in just 2 hours. And you know if they had, I'd be down at 43rd Street answering questions between an occasional break to puke in the basin. Are they running you, Eddie? Balazar asked mildly. No, they had to let me go. They're following, but I'm not leading. So you ditched the stuff, Balazar said. That's fascinating. You must tell me how one ditches 2 pounds of coke when that one is on a jet plane. It would be handy information to have. It's like a locked room mystery story. I didn't ditch it, Eddie said, but I don't have it anymore either. So who does? Claudio asked, then blushed when his brother looked at him with dour ferocity. He does, Eddie said, smiling, and pointed at Enrico Balazar over the tower of cards. It's already been delivered. For the first time since Eddie had been escorted into the office, a genuine expression illuminated Balazar's face. Surprise. Then it was gone. He smiled politely. Yes, he said, to a location which will be revealed later, after you have your brother and your goods and are gone. To Iceland, maybe. Is that how it's supposed to go? No, Eddie said. You don't understand. It's here, delivered right to your door, just like we agreed, because even in this day and age, there are some people who will still believe in living up to a deal as it's originally cut. Amazing, I know, but true. They were all staring at him. How am I doing, Roland? Eddie asked. I think you're doing very well, but don't let this man Balazar get his balance, Eddie. I think he's dangerous. You think so, huh? Well, I'm one up on you there, my friend. I know he's dangerous. Very fucking dangerous. He looked at Balazar again and dropped him a little wink. That's why you're the one who's got to be concerned with the feds now, not me. If they turn up with a search warrant, you could suddenly find yourself fucked without ever even opening your legs, Mr. Balazar. Balazar had picked up 2 cards. His hand suddenly shook and he put them aside. It was minute, but Roland saw it and Eddie saw it too. An expression of uncertainty, even momentary fear perhaps, appeared and then disappeared on his face. Watch your mouth with me, Eddie. Watch how you express yourself, and please remember that my time and my tolerance for nonsense are both short. Jack Andolini looked alarmed. He made a deal with them, Mr. Balazar. This little shit turned over the coke and they planted it while they were pretending to question him. No one has been in here, Balazar said. No one could get close, Jack, and you know it. Beepers go when a pigeon farts on the roof. But even if they had managed to set us up somehow, we have so many people in their organization we could drill 15 holes in their case in 3 days. We'd know who, when, and how. Balazar looked at Eddie. Eddie, he said, you have 15 seconds to stop bullshitting. Then I'm going to have Simi Dretto step in here and hurt you. Then, after he hurts you for a while, he will leave, and from a room close by, you will hear him hurting your brother. Eddie stiffened. Easy, the gunslinger murmured, and thought, all you have to do to hurt him is to say his brother's name. It's like poking an open sore with a stick. I'm going to walk into your bathroom, Eddie said. He pointed at a door in the far left corner of the room, a door so unobtrusive it could almost have been one of the wall's panels. I'm going in by myself. Then I'm going to walk out here with a pound of your cocaine, half the shipment. You test it. Then you bring Henry in here where I can have a look at him. Then I see him, see he's okay. You are going to give him our goods, and he's going to ride home with one of your gentlemen. While he does, me and Roland, he almost said, me and the rest of the guys we both know you got here can watch you build that thing. When Henry's home and safe, which means no one standing there with a gun in his ear, he's going to call and say a certain word. This is something we worked out before I left, just in case. The gunslinger checked Eddie's mind to see if this was true or bluff. It was true, or at least Eddie thought it was. Roland saw Eddie really believed his brother Henry would die before saying that word in falsity. The gunslinger was not so sure. You must think I believe in Santa Claus, Balazar said. I know you don't. Claudio, search him. Jack, you go in the bathroom and search it. Everything. Is there any place in there I wouldn't know about? Andolini asked. Balazar paused for a moment, considering Andolini carefully with his dark eyebrows. There is a small panel on the back wall of the medicine cabinet, he said. I keep a few personal things in there. It is not big enough to hide a pound of dope in, but maybe you'd better check it. Jack left, and as he entered the little privy, the gunslinger saw a flash of the same frozen white light that had illuminated the privy of the air carriage. Then the door shut. Balazar's eyes flicked to Eddie. Why do you want to tell such crazy lies? He asked, almost sorrowfully. I thought you were smart. Look in my face, Eddie said quietly, and tell me that I am lying. Balazar did as Eddie asked. He looked for a long time, then he turned away, hands stuffed in his pockets so deeply that the crack of his peasant's ash showed a little. His posture was one of sorrow, sorrow over an erring son. But before he turned, Roland had seen an expression on Balazar's face that had not been sorrow. What Balazar had seen in Eddie's face had left him not sorrowful, but profoundly disturbed. Strip, Claudio said, and now he was holding his gun on Eddie. Eddie started to take his clothes off. 5. I don't like this, Balazar thought as he waited for Jack Andolini to come back out of the bathroom. He was scared, suddenly sweating not just under his arms or in his crotch, places where he sweated even when it was the dead of winter and colder than a well-digger's belt buckle, but all over. Eddie had gone off looking like a junkie, a smart junkie, but still a junkie, someone who could be led anywhere by the skag fish hook in his balls, and had come back looking like what? Like he'd grown in some way, changed. It's like somebody poured 2 quarts of fresh guts down his throat. Yes, that was it. And the dope, the fucking dope. Jack was tossing the bathroom and Claudio was checking Eddie with the thorough ferocity of a sadistic prison guard. Eddie had stood with a stolidity that Balazar would not have previously believed possible for him or any other doper, while Claudio spat 4 times into his left palm, rubbed the snot-flecked spittle all over his right hand, then rammed it up Eddie's asshole to the wrist and an inch or 2 beyond. There was no dope in this bathroom, no dope on Eddie or in him. There was no dope in Eddie's clothes, his jacket, or his traveling bag, so it was all nothing but a bluff. Look in my face and tell me that I am lying. So he had. What he had seen was upsetting. What he saw was that Eddie Dean was perfectly confident. He intended to go into the bathroom and come back with half of Balazar's goods. Balazar almost believed it himself. Claudio Andolini pulled his arm back. His fingers came out of Eddie Dean's asshole with a plopping sound. Claudio's mouth twisted like a fish line with knots in it. Hurry up, Jack. I got this junkie's shit on my hand, Claudio yelled angrily. If I'd known you were going to be prospecting up there, Claudio, I would have wiped my ass with a chair leg next time I took a dump, Eddie said mildly. Your hand would have come out cleaner, and I wouldn't be standing here feeling like I just got raped by Ferdinand the Bull. Jack, go on down to the kitchen and clean yourself up, Balazar said quietly. Eddie and I have got no reason to hurt each other. Do we, Eddie? No, Eddie said. He's clean anyway, Claudio said. Well, clean ain't the word. What I mean is he ain't holding. You can be goddamn sure of that. He walked out, holding his dirty hand in front of him like a dead fish. Eddie looked calmly at Balazar, who was thinking again of Harry Houdini, and Blackstone, and Doug Henning, and David Copperfield. They kept saying that magic acts were as dead as vaudeville, but Henning was a superstar, and Copperfield Kid had blown the crowd away the one time Balazar had caught his act in Atlantic City. Balazar had loved magicians from the first time he had seen one on a street corner, doing card tricks for pocket change. And what was the first thing they always did before making something appear? Something that would make the whole audience first gasp and then applaud? What they did was invite someone up from the audience to make sure that the place from which the rabbit or dove or bare-breasted cutie or the whatever was to appear was perfectly empty. More than that, to make sure there was no way to get anything inside. I think maybe he's done it. I don't know how, and I don't care. The only thing I know for sure is that I don't like any of this, not one damn bit. 6. George Biondi also had something not to like. He doubted if Eddie Dean was going to be wild about it either. George was pretty sure that at some point after Simi had come into the accountant's office and doused the lights, Henry had died. Died quietly, with no muss, no fuss, no bother. He simply floated away like a dandelion spore on a light breeze. George thought maybe it had happened right around the time Claudio left to wash his shitty hand in the kitchen. Henry, George muttered in Henry's ear. He put his mouth so close that it was like kissing a girl's ear in a movie theater, and that was pretty fucking gross, especially when you considered that the guy was probably dead. It was like narcophobia or whatever the fuck they called it. But he had to know. And the wall between this office and Balazar's was thin. What's wrong, George? Trix Pastino asked. Shut up, Simi said. His voice was the low rumble of an idling truck. They shut up. George slid a hand inside Henry's shirt. Oh, this was getting worse and worse. That image of being with a girl in a movie theater wouldn't leave him. Now here he was, feeling her up, only it wasn't a her, but a him. This wasn't just narcophobia, it was fucking faggot narcophobia. And Henry's scrawny, junky chest wasn't moving up and down, and there wasn't anything inside going thump, thump, thump. For Henry Dean, it was all over. For Henry Dean, the ball game had been rained out in the 7th inning. Wasn't nothing ticking but his watch. He moved into the heavy old country atmosphere of olive oil and garlic that surrounded Simi Detto. I think we might have a problem, George whispered. 7. Jack came out of the bathroom. There's no dope in there, he said, and his flat eyes studied Eddie. And if you were thinking about the window, you can forget it. That's 10-gauge steel mesh. I wasn't thinking about the window, and it is in there, Eddie said quietly. You just don't know where to look. I'm sorry, Mr. Balazar, Andolini said, but this crock is getting a little too full for me. Balazar studied Eddie as if he hadn't even heard Andolini. He was thinking very deeply. Thinking about magicians pulling rabbits out of hats. You got the guy from the audience to check out the fact that the hat was empty. What other thing that never changed? That no one saw into the hat but the magician, of course. And what had the kid said? I'm going to walk into your bathroom. I'm going in by myself. Knowing how a magic trick worked was something he usually wouldn't want to know. Knowing spoiled the fun. Usually. This, however, was a trick he couldn't wait to spoil. Fine, he said to Eddie. If it's in there, go get it. Just like you are. Bare ass. Good, Eddie said, and started toward the bathroom door. But not alone, Balazar said. Eddie stopped at once, his body stiffening as if Balazar had shot him with an invisible harpoon, and it did Balazar's heart good to see it. For the first time, something hadn't gone according to the kid's plan. Jack's going with you. No, Eddie said at once. That's not what I... Eddie, Balazar said gently. You don't tell me no. That's one thing you never do. 8. "It's all right," the gunslinger said. "Let him come." But, Eddie was close to gibbering, barely holding on to his control. It wasn't just the sudden curveball Balazar had thrown him. It was his gnawing worry over Henry and, growing steadily ascendant over all else, his need for a fix. "Let him come. It will be all right. Listen." Eddie listened. 9. Balazar watched him, a slim, naked man with only the first suggestion of the junkie's typical cave-chested slouch. His head cocked to one side, and as he watched, Balazar felt some of his confidence evaporate. It was as if the kid was listening to a voice only he could hear. The same thought passed through Andolini's mind, but in a different way. "What's this? He looks like the dog on those old RCA Victor records." Cole had wanted to tell him something about Eddie's eyes. Suddenly, Jack Andolini wished he had listened. Wish in one hand, shit in the other, he thought. If Eddie had been listening to voices inside his head, they had either quit talking or he had quit paying attention. "Okay," he said. "Come along, Jack. I'll show you the eighth wonder of the world." He flashed a smile that neither Jack Andolini or Enrico Balazard cared for in the slightest. "Is that so?" Andolini pulled a gun from the clamshell holster attached to his belt at the small of his back. "Am I going to be amazed?" Eddie's smile widened. "Oh yeah, I think this is going to knock your socks off." 10. Andolini followed Eddie into the bathroom. He was holding the gun up because his wind was up. "Close the door," Eddie said. "Fuck you," Andolini answered. "Close the door or no dope," Eddie said. "Fuck you," Andolini said again. Now, a little scared, feeling that there was something going on that he didn't fully understand. Andolini looked brighter than he had in the van. "He won't close the door," Eddie yelled at Balazar. "I'm getting ready to give up on you, Mr. Balazar. You probably got 6 wise guys in this place, every one of them with about 4 guns, and the 2 of you are going batshit over a kid in a crapper. A junkie kid." "Shut the fucking door, Jack," Balazar shouted. "That's right," Eddie said as Jack Andolini kicked the door shut behind him. "Is you a man or is you a man?" "Oh boy, ain't I had enough of this turd," Andolini said, to no one in particular. He raised the gun, butt forward, meaning to pistol whip Eddie across the mouth. Then he froze. Gun drawn up across his body, the snarl that bared his teeth slackening into a slack-jawed gape of surprise as he saw what Cole Vincent had seen in the van. Eddie's eyes changed from brown to blue. "Now grab him," a low, commanding voice said, and although the voice came from Eddie's mouth, it was not Eddie's voice. Schizo, Jack Andolini thought. He's gone schizo, gone fucking schiz. But the thought broke off when Eddie's hands grabbed his shoulders, because when that happened, Andolini saw a hole in reality suddenly appear about 3 feet behind Eddie. No, not a hole. Its dimensions were too perfect for that. It was a door. "Hail Mary, full of grace," Jack said in a low, breathy moan. Through that door, which hung in a space a foot or so above the floor in front of Balazar's private shower, he could see a dark beach which sloped down to crashing waves. Things were moving on that beach. Things. He brought the gun down, but the blow, which had been meant to break off all of Eddie's front teeth at the gum line, did no more than mash Eddie's lips back and bloody them a little. All the strength was running out of him. Jack could feel it happening. "I told you it was going to knock your socks off, Jack," Eddie said, and then yanked him. Jack realized what Eddie meant to do at the last moment and began to fight like a wildcat, but it was too late. They were tumbling backward through the doorway, and the droning hum of New York City at night, so familiar and constant you never even heard it unless it wasn't there anymore, was replaced by the grinding sound of the waves and the grating, questioning voices of dimly seen horrors crawling to and fro on the beach. 11. "We'll have to move very fast or we'll find ourselves basted on hot toast," Roland had said, and Eddie was pretty sure the guy meant that if they didn't shuck and jive damn near the speed of light, their gooses were going to be cooked. He believed it, too. When it came to hard guys, Jack Andolini was like Dwight Gooden. You could rock him, yes. You could shock him, maybe. But if you let him get away on the early innings, he was going to stomp you flat later on. "Left hand," Roland screamed at him as they went through, and he separated from Eddie. "Remember, left hand, left hand." He saw Eddie and Jack stumble backward, fall, and then go rolling down the rocky scree that edged the beach, struggling for the gun in Andolini's hand. Roland had just time to think what a cosmic joke it would be if he arrived back in his own world only to discover that his physical body had died while he had been away. And then it was too late to wonder, too late to go back. 12. Andolini didn't know what had happened. Part of him was sure he had gone crazy. Part was sure Eddie had doped him or gassed him or something like that. Hart believed that the vengeful god of his childhood had finally tired of his evils and had plucked him away from the world he knew and set him down in this weird purgatory. Then he saw the door, standing open, spilling a fan of white light, the light from Balazar's John, onto the rocky ground, and understood it was possible to get back. Andolini was a practical man above all else. He would worry about what all this meant later on. Right now, he intended to kill this creep's ass and get back through that door. The strength that had gone out of him in his shocked surprise now flooded back. He realized Eddie was trying to pull his small but very efficient Colt Cobra out of his hand and had nearly succeeded. Jack pulled it back with a curse, tried to aim, and Eddie promptly grabbed his arm again. Andolini hoisted a knee into the big muscle of Eddie's right thigh. The expensive gabardine of Andolini's slacks was now crusted with dirty gray beach sand, and Eddie screamed as the muscle seized up. "Roland," he cried, "help me, for Christ's sake, help me." Andolini snapped his head around, and what he saw threw him off balance again. There was a guy standing there. Only he looked more like a ghost than a guy. Not exactly Casper the Friendly Ghost either. The swaying figure's white, haggard face was rough with beard stubble. His shirt was in tatters, which blew back behind him in twisted ribbons, showing the starved stack of his ribs. A filthy rag was wrapped around his right hand. He looked sick and dying, but even so, he also looked tough enough to make Andolini feel like a soft-boiled egg. And the Joker was wearing a pair of guns. They looked older than the hills, old enough to have come from a Wild West museum, but they were guns just the same, and they might even really work, and Andolini suddenly realized he was going to have to take care of that white-faced man right away, unless he really was a spook, and if that was the case, it wouldn't matter fuck all, so there was really no sense worrying about it. Andolini let go of Eddie, and Snap rolled to the right, barely feeling the edge of rock that tore open his $500 sport jacket. At the same instant, the gunslinger drew left-handed, and his draw was, as it always had been, sick or well, wide awake or still half asleep, faster than a streak of blue summer lightning. "I'm beat," Andolini thought, full of sick wonder. "Christ, he's faster than anybody I ever saw. I'm beat. Holy Mary, Mother of God, he's gonna blow me away. The man in the ragged shirt pulled the trigger of the revolver in his left hand, and Jack Andolini really thought he was dead before he realized there had only been a dull click instead of a report. Misfire. Smiling, Andolini rose to his knees and raised his own gun. "I don't know who you are, but you can kiss your ass goodbye, you fucking spook," he said. 13. Eddie sat up, shivering, his naked body pocked with goosebumps. He saw Roland draw, heard the dry snap of what should have been a bang, saw Andolini come up on his knees, heard him say something, and before he really knew what he was doing, his hand had found a ragged chunk of rock. He pulled it out of the grainy earth and threw it as hard as he could. It struck Andolini high on the back of the head and bounced away. Blood sprayed from a ragged hanging flap in Jack Andolini's scalp. Andolini fired, but the bullet that surely would have killed the gunslinger otherwise went wild. And again, just like the last couple of times, we're going to continue this in a part 2. Thanks for your patience.